Hello and welcome to Expert Talks on Kalkine TV. I'm your host, Rose Jacobs. This is a show where we meet experts and industry leaders from right across the globe to share their knowledge, advice and insights, helping you build your own success and businesses and investments. Today we're looking at why airspace is going to be the big real estate trend of this decade. Australia is poised to admit large numbers of immigrants to kickstart the post-COVID economy. And this begs a very obvious question: where will all these people live? One answer might be to take advantage of a growing trend called airspace development. I'm pleased to introduce our guest today, Warren Livesey, founder of Buy Airspace and a Strata property development specialist. Warren, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Now, this is quite fascinating. Australia is poised, as we've said, to admit large numbers of immigrants, and this is kickstarting the post-COVID economy. So where do you propose all of these people could potentially live?
Well, there's two options. One, either within our existing infrastructure that we have at the present moment, or obviously stretching and making the city that much wider. So my main suggestion to us is that we use the existing infrastructure, being the roof space above apartment buildings.
Now, of course, we're talking about a roof space that may or may not already exist. So can you talk us through, first of all, the growing real estate trend called airspace development? What exactly does this entail?
Well, ultimately, airspace is from where the building kind of finishes, the roof space, until where you're permitted to go to with council regulations. So when you actually buy a plot of land, and maybe that is, maybe 300 square meters, you actually own all that airspace from the ground all the way up until where council allow you to build. So that airspace is either built at the present moment, which you would obviously cap off, but what we're quite interested in is from the roof space up to the additional head space that you can actually build to.
So would you say that there are many people currently living in their place and they're unaware of the fact that they have some budding real estate sitting right there above their heads?
Rosie, I'd say pretty much everyone I've really ever spoken to. People do, when they buy a top floor apartment, they generally do so with the understanding that they may extend into the roof. But this generally is kind of a small attic space or a small addition to their existing property, where we're actually suggesting putting a new apartment or two up in that roof space. Because presently all the roof spaces, as you can well imagine, is this A-frame type space that we actually don't need along the coastline of Australia, because we don't get snow. We don't need the snow to kind of sit on the roof and then fall away. We can actually get away with flat roofs. So hopefully just using that idle space that's not being used to try and get more people into a closer proximity of schools, hospitals and police and the likes.
It sounds like a bit of a no-brainer, really, when you think of it that way. Now, I'm curious as to how the council determines how much space can be accessed above buildings. Is that to do with not blocking out neighbours' views, or is there more to it than that?
When council started to put down the various different zonings, most of the buildings were already built, to be honest. So you may be looking at a certain area which would be a low density area, be it around the beach side, but you'll see a lot of apartment blocks being built. So they won't, if they were to knock them down and rebuild them, they wouldn't be able to do that. So what we're trying to do is just what they call using the existing space more efficiently. And ultimately trying to put an additional apartment above in that space. So the main point of this is really to use those particular areas to house somebody else, and then we can sell that particular space to an investor or the group of owners, and then that amount of money can be used to fix up the building, because majority of the buildings along the east and west coast of Australia are lacking funds. They just don't have any money in the sinking fund to fix up their buildings, and they've been corroded away with the ocean and the likes. This is a way that we can actually then fund the sustainability upgrades to all these apartments that are so desperately in need of work.
So there are really quite a few win-wins out of this scenario. I mean, strata owners can be gaining a huge amount of extra value, and it's a benefit for the buildings as well.
Absolutely. Look, in Australia, it's possibly the largest housing sector we have is within apartment blocks. They are insured up to about $1.1 to $1.2 trillion. That's with a T. And on estimates, the unused space within apartment blocks ranges from about 10 to 15%. So there is a potential of recapping between 110 to 150 billion dollars worth of real estate that is presently just sitting there in idle.
It's interesting that there aren't more organisations or companies out there that have been onto this for some time already. Is it just a no-brainer for you?
It's very common in Europe, the US, the UK. They literally put modular homes on top of roofs. It's quite apart. In the UK, they are automatically guaranteeing that people can go up another level. It just hasn't been needed in Australia. Australia has so much land, and you have 28 million people in around. We've been able to fit in amongst that, but when we start looking at growing the population by 5-10%, where are we going to be able to put these people? As well as we have the hospitals and the schools and already set up in these particular areas. So if we are to stretch out the town in order to facilitate for these new people, then we're going to have to build all those facilities as well, which is going to be very, very expensive.
I've also heard that penthouses or very brand new top level apartments here can be typically a lot cheaper to build than to start from scratch with a new build. Is that right?
Absolutely. The joys of the apartment blocks is that you've got the foundations already there. Your electricity, water and gas are already plugged in. So you are constructing up in the roof space is primarily wood and glazing, glass work that can be done by predominantly carpenters. So it's the cheapest form of construction and obviously the most affordable to reach for the maximum amount of return, because obviously up in the roof space you have a large amount of light and privacy and obviously space for those issues.
It really is a win-win, and I guess as well, any extra income that comes from building these new builds, and the strata owners can then use the proceeds from the sale of these new spaces to potentially pay for repairs or maintenance of the existing building.
That's absolutely right. Really, it's where a lot of people along the coast they've spent their last dollar trying to get into this property market, which is going absolutely through the roof, pardon the pun, but they don't actually have the additional funds that are needed to fix a building. So this may be plumbing, fire upgrades, electrical, outer skin starting to need be replacement, and they sit there going, am I going to have to sell this apartment in order to be able to fund this? And this is just a method or a way to actually find the funds for the building in order for them to actually stay in their residence and obviously make some money, because where a top floor apartment may be worth say $2 to $3 million odd once it's been built, and most of that, say $2 million of that, can go back to the apartment owners, and they can use $1 million to fix up their building and make it more sustainable, get us more off the grid. But then obviously there's $1 million left over, which can actually be divided equally amongst the owners based on their unit entitlement. And if that space is on their own personal name, as in they own their apartment, it's a tax-free. So it's not just a win-win where on one side people see it as a huge expense of fixing the building. This is actually a way of making money and making their building more sustainable, which I think we need to do with climate change happening around the corner.
Indeed, a very valid point there. I can't imagine why anyone would say no to such a proposal. So I'd like to know, is it quite a difficult process for strata owners to gain the approval? What's involved in that process?
It's incredible because you're looking at fractional ownership. So many people owning. Everyone has their own financial goals, settings. Your neighbour's possibly not the first person you would consider going into a financial relationship with. But in saying all that, we are all apartment blocks are having this 10-year kind of what they call capital works plan of how they're going to fund fixing their building. And a lot of them are at a loss of how they're going to do it. They ultimately are either increasing their quarterly levies, or they do a once-off payment that ultimately getting funds into the strata from the owners to then fix it up. So what we're trying to do is that the process kind of generally falls over with the owners doing it themselves, because there's so many approval stages. So the suggestion that I have after doing 75 developments and speaking to over 1,000 apartments is to try and get the owners out of the decision-making process sooner than later. And the fact that if they are comfortable with selling that particular roof space for $1 million or $1.5 million, then the investor or the group of owners can then take that particular space and design it accordingly, without going through all the various levels of approvals, which generally stop and get everyone into this death roll, sadly.
It sounds like it's quite vital to have somebody like you involved in that process, that's for sure. So if people are actually interested in finding out more about this, what's the best way for people to learn more?
I have general information on my website, buyairspace.com.au. And of course, just calling me and getting some general information, because it is an amazing opportunity that I honestly think can help us, not only help those particular owners that don't have the additional funds, but also this huge need to make buildings sustainable. So reusing the rainwater and solar power to charge batteries that you ultimately use for the building consumption. So everything that can get us off the grid and make us more climate efficient in regards to intelligent lighting and windows and airflow is just what we're going to have to be thinking of doing, because every degree or 2 degrees change here in the coast, it changes 5, 6, 7 degrees in the inland. So certain areas are going to be uninhabitable in the next 15 to 20 odd years, potentially, if nothing's done at the present moment.
It certainly sounds like it's a very exciting time in terms of real estate and where we're going over the next decade or so, and it certainly sounds like you're the man for the job. Warren Livesey, founder of Buy Airspace and Strata development specialist, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Rosie. I appreciate the opportunity.
And that's it for Expert Talks for today, but stay tuned for plenty more content coming your way. And in the meantime, as we say here, stay apprised and invest wise with Kalkine TV. I'm Rose Jacobs. Thanks for joining us.